Welcome to the Overcommitted Podcast, your weekly dose of real engineering conversations. I'm your host this week, Bethany, and I'm joined by...
Hey, I'm Brittany.
And I'm Erica.
We met while working on a team at GitHub and quickly realized we were all obsessed with getting better at what we do. So we decided to start this podcast to share what we've learned. We'll be talking about everything from leveling up your technical skills to navigating your professional development, all with the goal of creating a community where engineers can learn and connect. Today on Overcommitted, we are joined by John Crickett, a software engineer with over 30 years of experience who's on a mission to help developers level up by actually building things. John is the creator of Coding Challenges, a weekly newsletter with over 90,000 subscribers that gives engineers real-world projects to build. Think your own Redis server, your own Git client, your own shell. He's also the host of the Coding Chats podcast and has some really thoughtful takes on how AI is reshaping the craft of software engineering. Welcome, John.
Hi, thank you for having me, and thanks for the warm welcome, Bethany and Brittany and Erica.
Absolutely. So excited to chat with you. To kick us off, is there anything you're currently building or learning that has you excited right now?
Okay, well, I'll try and cover a few of them then. So AI. AI is why I got into I got into programming 40 years ago when I was a 9-year-old kid, because I wanted to create AI. And 9-year-old with computers in those days wasn't going to get very far, but so always been passionate about AI. So always happy to learn more about that. And it's a massive field. It's only a small subset of computer science, but computer science is big enough you could never learn it all. AI is still big enough within that niche you could never learn it all. So lots of fun things there. I'm also having a little bit of fun recently revisiting. Literally yesterday I started looking at Lisp, a language from AI, going back almost, 70 years nearly? Going back since it's invented, I'm finally getting around to learning it, thanks to a guest that's coming on my podcast shortly. Sent me his book, so that looks like a really fun way of learning about it that I'm digging into. What else am I digging into at the moment? I'm trying to slowly learn Swift, build a project on Mac, build the first native app on Mac that I've ever done. Probably many more things. It just, whatever takes my fancy. I'm a little bit drawn to shiny things and easily distracted.
That's awesome. I think that's part of the beauty of software engineering is the shiny things, and especially how quickly our field is iterating, even now. That's so interesting about Lisp is that still relevant today with modern AI, or is it more a relic of the past, would you say?
So I am far from the expert to ask about that, but I would say yes, it's still relevant. One of the beautiful things about Lisp is it's a very simple structure, and that lends itself really well, I think, to actually finally making genetic programming happen. So everyone's talking about LLMs at the moment, but one of the really cool things I think you could do, I think some people at Google are doing this, but I'm not sure, is you could write your code in Lisp with an LLM, and then you could use genetic programming ideas to evolve that code and know that the code you can abuse genetic programming would still be valid. I think that's one of the big challenges from 25, 30 years ago when I last looked at genetic programming, was how do you produce code when you do crossover and your mutations that's still valid? Where Lisp lends itself well to that, but everything was too slow 30 years ago to evaluate it. Now with an LLM to generate it and modern computers, I think you could actually do something interesting there. And I think people from Google are, but I'm not certain.
That's really interesting. We will make sure to link to your podcast. So if anybody's interested in learning from the Lisp expert as well, they can follow along. Awesome. So steering back to Coding Challenges, I understand you started it back in 2023 while you were learning Rust. And now it's over, like we mentioned, 90,000 subscribers. And it really focuses on this idea that engineers should level up by building tools that they interact with daily. So like Redis, Git, shells, things that we interact with as software engineers, rather than grinding those algorithm problems. Did you have a moment, like an aha moment, that made you realize that this was a approach that resonates with people, or was it something that you have always been drawn to?
So I've always followed this approach. I've always hated, I learned programming from a textbook because I'm old. I hated opening a book and they'd say like, write this factorial function. And you're like, another factorial function? I want to write something more interesting. So, I grew up learning to program by trying to write AI, which of course didn't go very far, and trying to do computer games, which is the other thing, because, going back 40 years ago, most of us, computer games quite new. It's exciting. You got to see some colored pixels move across the screen and do something, and it looked a bit more exciting than a factorial function where you factorial 5 and it goes 120 and you're like, brilliant, but it's not very exciting. It's not very interesting. Can't show your mates at year 10 and go, hey, I made it do math. No one's impressed. They just think you're a bit of a nerd. So yeah, I was drawn to trying to make things happen. And I've always approached that. So I tried with AI, obviously failed miserably. I tried with games in the early parts of my programming journey. And then as I sort of entered the workforce, started working professionally, then I started trying to build small applications. How do I actually ship something that uses this? Because, I don't just want to learn Perl, as it was then, or Visual Basic or C. I want to learn how to build an application with them. How do I ship something with this? So one of the first coding challenges I did was Huffman compression, which I did for the first time in 1998 when I was learning C. And I've done it since in several different programming languages as a way of learning that language and building something real. I mean, it's not very impressive with Huffman encoding to compress a text file. Yes, you get some compression, but it's not as good as gzip. But it's still building something real and learning a whole bunch of the programming language and shipping something. So I've done that approach, like I say, for decades now. It became coding challenges because, like a lot of people, I got laid off in 2022. The economy's changed and things happened. And my wife pushed me to start another business, said, you've always been most secure in employment when you've been running your own business, do another business. And I'm terrible at business ideas. So I'd seen this thing about personal branding, seen a few talks on some podcasts about developers building an audience and building a tool for their audience, and thought, hey, I like lighting. Personal branding seems to be lighting. That suits me. Maybe I can build an audience, figure out a tool to build for that audience, and then I don't have to come up with a business idea. I can let the audience find it. So I started writing on LinkedIn with about 3,000 followers, figuring I'd try and learn how to build an audience, and then I could let that audience lead me to building a tool for software engineers that would be a business idea. And along the way, I saw a post from a European VC talking about how he'd invested 750,000 euros in his business 2 years ago, and then I wanted another €250,000 to get to their MVP. And that just triggered me a little bit, because back when I started my first business in 2001, it was just the dot-com crash, the telecom crash. There were a whole lot of people that were excited about this idea of dot-coms that had been made redundant and were taking redundancy payments, remortgaging their houses and coming along saying, I'm going to build a dot-com, I'm going to invest it all, and this time next year I'll be millionaires. Typically 6 months later, I'd see them all and they're like, bankrupt, I need a job now. I built this thing and nobody came. And it's like, well, you didn't validate your idea. You didn't test it. You just threw money at building a .com. You put it out there and you got precisely 0 visitors, because it's not as simple as you build it and they will come. You've got to actually do some marketing and figure out how to get some eyeballs there. So shortly after seeing that, seeing so many people lose out, I read about lean startup ideas and ideas of MVP, and I've always been struck for that. And just validate your idea. Well, kind of tongue-in-cheek and a little bit just in being triggered by this idea of put €1 million and two years of work into it. I put a post on LinkedIn with my 3 and a bit thousand followers at the time saying, founders, if you spent more than $100 and take more than 2 weeks to build it, it's not an MVP. And I didn't really think anything of it, but that was my first somewhat viral post, got about 100,000 views. And mostly people just tell me what an absolute freaking idiot I was, that you don't get 2 weeks of software engineer's time for $100. And it's like, well, yes, but if you're a founder, that 2 weeks is your sweat equity. You do it yourself. That $100 is, buy a domain name and you validate your idea. And a lot of people as well as him as a freaking idiot said this was impossible. So I thought, well, I'm trying to validate some ideas. Let's actually, walk the walk. Buy a domain name, $17 for coding challenges.fyi. What am I going to start? Well, I'm trying to reach software engineers. What can I help them with? I can help them learn. I've mentored lots of people. So I've been a manager for many years. I can help them learn. So how do I learn? Let's just write about that. I launched a newsletter. I've heard about this paid newsletter thing on Substack. That will be my first test of validating a business idea. Sure enough, I had the idea, I think, on a Monday morning, wrote about it, launched it on Friday, so less than my 2 weeks, $17 and a domain name. Substack's free to set up a newsletter. Launched, I think, on the Friday evening, UK time. I thought if I get 1,000 people by the end of the year, that there's maybe some legs to this idea. Maybe I can build something off the back of this. 1,500 people signed up by the close of Sunday.
And were all those folks or do you think it was really because of that following that you accumulated on LinkedIn? Do you think it was word of mouth? I mean, obviously it was a surprise if you were anticipating 1,000 by the end of the year. What do you think helps you get the so many in a weekend?
I think it just resonated. At the time, I had 3,200, 3,300 followers on LinkedIn, so a fairly small audience. And most of those were people outside of software that I'd networked with over the years, from building businesses previously. So it wasn't a particularly big audience. I didn't have a big platform on LinkedIn at the time, but it just seemed to resonate with people. A lot of people, don't like LeetCode. They wanted to build something a bit more real. I think that resonated. People talked about it. People shared it. And there was a nice little community of software developers that kind of met on LinkedIn at that time. So yeah, it just seemed to take off and work on its own.
Yeah. It's really heartening to hear that story because I've heard some discussions of like
I can't hear
self-promotion
Erica,
and
by the way.
sorry, what?
Oh, I can hear Erica.
Can you
Yeah,
not
I
hear
can
me?
hear her. I can, let's see here. I can
Can
hear
you hear any
you.
of us?
I can hear you.
I can hear
I'm
Bethany
talking.
and Brittany, but not
Okay.
Erica.
Really?
No,
Interesting to know.
I can. Huh.
I can still hear you, but can you use like just the MacBook one?
Yeah, let me try that. I can't switch mics.
Isn't technology great? Aren't we all glad we work in software and tech?
Every
My
time something
brain
like
is
this
going.
happens, yeah, I'm always like, I promise I'm an engineer. Like, I know how to work with computers.
My brain's just going like, how can one person on this call not hear the other person? How does that bug happen? That's wild.
That's true.
Oh, okay.
You could
Sorry,
stick it in the chat
Erica.
if you like, Erica, and I'll try and answer.
Oh, there we go.
She said it was a long thought.
It's a shame.
I still hear typing, so I'm waiting. Yeah, why don't you try? We'll pause. So odd, man. I have never experienced that at all on Riverside. That is so wild.
We're getting all of the lucky side problems with John
Yes.
today.
Just make sure none of us leave early and mess up Riverside that way.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes.
That's true. Good point.
Done that once on my podcast and messed it up, and that was quite embarrassing.
No.
Yeah. Do you use Riverside as well then?
Yes.
Makes sense.
Makes me feel better that you've been in the same boat. You understand with
Yeah.
Riverside.
It's really heartening to me to hear that story of how you started coding challenges. And I think I've heard some people say in the whole topic of self-promotion that, a couple things like it's not even worth trying because like YouTube, Spotify, whatever, the algorithm is too strong to ever, work against. I'm going to have to like do all this marketing magic to even get out there. And also like this idea that you kind of have to like fabricate something or like be some kind of persona or be someone in order to like amass a following. But I mean, in my experience, the people who I enjoy following the most are people who are genuinely interested in what they're doing. And that's exactly your story. And I think especially in software engineering, we can smell the fake, like sort of the fakeness in somebody trying to sell us something. So I think it's one of the things I enjoy a lot about being a part of software engineering communities is this idea that, yeah, like when you have interesting content that is technical, that is realistic, that's genuine, people really enjoy that. And you don't like, if you do have some kind of algorithm boosting you, great. But even if not, people will share and reshare things that are uniquely good. And yeah, it's cool to hear those stories where that's what happens.
Yeah, the thing that I think a lot of people forget is, particularly with software engineering, it's probably a bit skewed recently with how recruitment has been, but we have this very pyramid structure that, just to go back 2 years ago, Stack Overflow's stats show that something like 51% of software engineers have less than 10 years of experience. So it's been a very fast-growing industry with a lot of people who are very junior and a lot more people coming up. What that means if you think about trying to build a personal brand or build a following or just reach people and find your niche is you can always think that there's going to be somebody behind you, wherever you are in your journey. There's a lot more people who are 1 year, 2 years behind you in learning that thing that you're interested in. So rather than try and be a character or be something you're not, the simplest way is just to go, this is what I'm learning, or this is how you can learn X. Because again, if I tell somebody how to learn, I don't know, Visual Basic, say, I haven't touched it for 28 years. I don't remember what it's like to be a learner and that. Where somebody that, do people still learn Visual Basic? But somebody that's just learned it now is far more familiar with that pain, far more familiar with the current state of the tooling. And maybe PHP might be a better example. Again, last time I did PHP, it was version 5. Is it 8 or 9 it's on now? Somebody that's learning that even if they've only got 1 year experience, somebody that's just entering the workforce or somebody that's just leaving university, you can relate far better to them and know the pain that they're going through than anything I could write about it. So, and again, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be somebody with 30 years versus somebody with 1 year's experience. There's a whole bunch of us learning AI at the moment, say maybe learning agentic frameworks. You might only be 6 months ahead of learning somebody. You might be 2 years into your career, but 6 months ahead in that journey than somebody else that's been in this career for 30 years. So there's always somebody that's behind you on whatever journey you're going that can benefit from your recent experience, this is the pain I've just been through recently, this is what I've struggled with. And I think too often people forget about that. The downside with social media though, and this is something that bugs me a little bit, is when you engage with somebody's content, when you comment on it, you amplify it. So there are a lot of people that are pushing things that are maybe incorrect or pushing hype. And the trouble is a lot of people pile on and say, that's wrong, this is ridiculous. But they forget that they're then amplifying that message and drowning out the people that maybe are teaching the correct thing. So again, if you want to be providing something genuine and teaching people, and find your little niche of creators that are going to, collaborate and focus on putting forward your message, promoting your niche and whatever, and try and stay away from amplifying the voices that don't fit that.
Totally agree. I feel like being on social media in this day and time, there's so much rage bait because it leads to engagement that when something makes somebody angry, it probably gets more engagement than something that makes somebody feel good or that is accurate because those are harder to contend with, or not contend with, but engage with.
Yeah. Well, back to my comment about the viral post that I got at first. It wasn't intended as rage bait. It was just more frustration at seeing people wasting time and money on this. But, it triggered a bunch of people and it went, to over 100,000 views when I had a tiny audience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I loved your stories about really remembering that beginner mindset and how folks approach problems as a beginner. So I know you mentioned your newsletter from the challenges on Substack, and that commonly breaks down mistakes that engineers make while tackling large projects. Is that something that you resonated with, like from learning engineering as a beginner? Is that something that you've just seen others making that mistake and you're trying to protect them against? I'm curious, what made you focus on those engineering challenges versus maybe teaching specific languages or things like that?
So I needed a bit of variety to keep me interested in writing the newsletters rather than churning out a challenge each week. So, and I'd had a lot of people asking for tutorials or asking for show us how to do these, not just the challenges. And I very much position it as I want it to be language and platform neutral. So I try and make the challenges as tech agnostic as possible. Some of them you could build a CLI UI, you could build a web UI, you could build a native GUI, you could build a mobile app. So you could adapt it to learning whatever you wanted within what suits the challenge. So I also wanted the feedback to be platform and language agnostic. So it's no good me saying, this is how you should do it in C++, smart pointers, and so on. Only about 5% of the audience is using C++. So it wasn't going to resonate with a lot of people. So I wanted to pick out lessons that I'd seen. And one of the things that I found incredibly useful early in my career was I was lucky enough to work with and know some very experienced people and get code reviews from them. And they treated code reviews as a way of sharing knowledge of like, hey, have you thought of this? Take the C++ one. You're using, better pointers here. Could you use a smart pointer? And I was like, smart pointers? What are they? Right, cool. I want to learn about that. So that was a great way of learning. So I wanted to try and bring some of that into it. And slightly early in the process, I'd created a GitHub repo where people could share their solutions. So that then gave me something to go look and say, like, well, I've got the WC coding challenge. How have people solved that? If I go and code review, not all the solutions, because there's about 130, I think now, but if I go and code review 20 or 30 of them, there's some common patterns. There's some common mistakes people make. And a great one with WC, for example, WC is a word count utility that also counts lines on Unix. And it's a very good example of a great little Unix program. It does one thing, well, one and a bit things, but it does it really well. And it's designed to process streams. It doesn't think of it as a text file necessarily, it's a stream. Because of that, then it's able to process any stream of data. Well, a lot of people immediately load WC and open up the entire file, read it into memory. So that's great if you go and test that on a file that's 100 kilobytes, or I think the 300 kilobyte example I've got was from Project Gutenberg, one of the books. But nearly nobody's one will actually work like the real WC and will handle 100 gigabyte files. So I extended the challenge recently, added 100 gigabyte file. 99% of the solutions will fail on that because they just opened up, they led the entire file into memory and then tried to process it. And not very many people have a laptop or desktop that will process 100 gig file in memory. But that's a great learning technique to actually then, it's fairly trivial work to change the processor stream. And that's a transferable skill because if you think about processing a stream, you can now process a stream over a network. You can process it from a TCP connection. You can process it from a pipe. You can process it from a file, and you get a whole different set of skills. So I wanted to pick out some of those lessons and introduce people to these other areas that they might not be familiar with.
That's really cool. I mean, doing some of the LeetCode style problems, they have something similar where they'll have the base case and it's very easy to get that to pass, but if it's not a good algorithm, it'll definitely fail. So that's cool, translating that almost to your real world problems and introducing that scale to these things that people actually are contending with day after day, rather than maybe these esoteric algorithms that we don't necessarily have to engage with as much.
Yeah, because realistically, when you deal with some of the LeetCode stuff, looks at how do you turn something that's order n squared to order n or whatever. When you're dealing with those, it's normally going to be something like processing a stream of data and doing some calculation on it. So thinking about some of those elements is kind of the precursor to getting to the point where you need to worry about how that algorithm scales. How does your just basic infrastructure scale?
Definitely. And I love being able to, or that a lot of folks take for granted these tools that we use every day, and maybe aren't contending with the underlying technology. So I think by building it, it also helps folks understand how things scale. So if something doesn't scale, they can more accurately debug it, or they've had more encounter with what's under the hood than maybe others to be able to leverage these tools more intelligently, which I know with AI, there's a lot of talk on eroding skills, or eroding, like, you're not going to use your skills so you'll lose them. I'm curious what your thoughts are, especially with having coding challenges, if this is something that you think will be a issue with AI, or if it's something that we just really need to make sure we understand the underlying technology even better now with usage, and it helps us.
So I'm going to tie that back to WC if I can, and start with one of the reasons I like the command line tools like WC, and I picked some of those out, is that they were built 30, 40, 50 years ago, some of them, and they still scale because they all have this very simple interface. They do one thing, they do it well, they process a stream of data, they don't particularly care about it. They're all text-based, they're command line based. This Unix system has pipes and the ability to pass stream from one pro. So you take these bunch of simple components and they can be put together to quite amazing stuff. There was a course on Coursera on doing data science with Bash, because there's so many powerful, simple tools, but combine them together, you can build very powerful data pipelines in Bash. And I think that the Unix philosophy that's well described in the book, The Art of Unix Programming, is so transferable. So it started with those command line programs that process streams. You can scale that to building microservices and doing things over REST API, to building things in the cloud and queues and all your event-driven architectures. All the same ideas transfer. And I think we've had that skill erosion for the last 30 years before AI. We come across very few more recent software engineers that understand what a pointer is, understand memory management, that have ever written C or a low-level language. And you see that we keep reinventing the wheels because we don't understand some of those underlying concepts. So I think there's a lot of knowledge we keep forgetting, like the ideas from the Art of Unix Programming, cause to us to reinvent things, cause to us have forgotten a lot of the lessons we had in the past. And so I think we've had that skill erosion as we've got higher up in the stack. And I mean, I quite often see people complaining about Python, for example, saying it's slow because it's interpreted. Okay, it's a little bit of a nitpick, but one of the things that bugs me there is we've lost this understanding of what does it mean to be compiled and interpreted, and does it matter? And also, the fundamental underlying important thing to understand is that languages aren't entirely compiled or interpreted. Languages are languages. You can go away and build an implementation of a language that is interpreted. You can go away and build one that's compiled. You can find an interpreter for C. You can find a compiler for Python. Basically, CPython is a compiler. It compiles it to bytecode. Java is compiled to bytecode as well. Both Java and Python are then run on a virtual machine. So they're interpreted on a virtual machine. So Python, for example, is compiled and interpreted. So is Java. But people say Java's compiled and Python's interpreted. They're not different. They have the same infrastructure. And what that misses then is that people don't have that basic understanding of what they're working on. And Java can be so much faster because the virtual machine then has the hotspot compiler, which is just-in-time compiler. And if you understand what that's doing, you understand why we can then have that in Python, and Python is getting a just-in-time compiler. You start to understand why JavaScript is so fast in a lot of the browsers, because browser manufacturers have put a massive investment into just-in-time compilers. So a lot of that fundamental knowledge, I think, has been lost as we've evolved for the last 20, 30 years, as people have been working more abstract, which is a great thing and we could be more productive. But I think if we'd focused a bit more on learning the fundamentals, everyone would be in a better position. And I have the same comment with AI when people saying AI is going to like the code, so you're out of a job as a software engineer. Well, software engineering has never been about just writing code to me. And again, sorry, I'm old. I went to uni in 1995. But when I did my computer science degree and we talked about software engineering, UK universities tend to view computer science as an academic subject, and it's almost a dirty word that you're going to use this for a career. But at the time when they talked about software engineering, the software engineering life cycle was you met a customer and you said, what do you want us to build? All the way through to you delivered a floppy disk in those days to the customer, installed it on their site, went for acceptance tests with them, and they saw that it worked and did what they wanted. The coding was a little tiny bit in the middle, where now I see people saying, well, I just want to code all day as software engineer. Well, that's not what software engineering is. You have to talk to a user, get requirements, do some analysis, figure out what you're going to build. And yes, we don't want to do that in a waterfall way because there's so many problems with that. Doing it in some kind of agile approach would be good, but we still have all the same steps of you have to do a lot of thinking. And AI, it's great at churning out code, can be problematic as well, but it can also be used for churning out requirements. It can be used for helping you think through your design. And just like humans, it can make mistakes there. It can have gaps in its knowledge that lead to hallucinations. It's not intelligent, it's not rational, it doesn't think, doesn't stop it from being incredibly useful. So I think we've been losing those skills for many, many years, probably not helped by this whole bootcamp notion of you can learn to code in 10 weeks and be a software engineer, which I think has led to this belief that software engineering is just coding and that you don't need to learn the rest of these things. And again, I don't think you need a degree to be a software engineer, so I don't want to gatekeep, but I think we have to be aware that it's a big field and there's a lot of work there and there's a lot of work involved. Yeah, sorry, slightly rambly, but I think the skill erosion has been happening for a while. And for people that only view it as coding, maybe it might erode a little bit of that, but there is much more to the job. And I'm quite excited because I suck at JavaScript and HTML and CSS, so I can now use AI to generate a front end that doesn't look like a 5-year-old drew it when they were feeling ill. And I can build some great software with that. And I can focus on the bits that excite me of problem solving. And then when I want to get into some hardcore code, I can go and use Lisp or Go, and I can go and nerd out and write in the code. But I can now achieve far more. So I think it's great, and it opens up opportunities to extend your skills into other areas too.
Yeah, it makes me think like the constraints that we're working with are still the same too, like CPU, memory, time, space, it's all the same. Nothing has changed since when you first started and now but we've sort of abstracted away not only some of the like languages, like how close you are to the memory management or the usage, and then yeah, I guess like the compute itself, like we don't work on a mainframe anymore. We work on cloud instances and that kind of stuff. So you SSH into a box, and we just have more compute at our fingers most of the time now. Like it's just more powerful, they're faster. And so I think, yeah, we sort of get into this false sense of security, like, oh, well, it's fine. It'll run fine. And then you get into these edge cases or when you try to scale or, like you said, like read a file that's greater than a certain size and it won't even run. We realize that it's still the same. It's still the same constraints. Yeah, it's hard to understand that stuff. Like, I mean, you can learn kind of the basics and like you said, 10 weeks or whatever, but then really digging in. Yeah, we have a book club as a part of our engineering community. And one of the books that got thrown out was like computer systems, a programmer's perspective, which I've read through before, and it is really hard to understand. And yeah, I mean, I'm still kind of processing. I got a lot from it, but yeah, it's not easy for sure when you really dig down. And yeah, I feel like your approach of providing that kind of look behind the tooling is a nice middle ground, at least, to be like, okay, you're using this tool on a daily basis, like, but what does it actually do? Yeah, and that's at least one layer deep than banging it against a wall and wondering why it doesn't work.
So there's two things I'd love to pick up on that, Erica. One, you mentioned we don't work on mainframes anymore. Again, I mentioned that our industry is growing and a lot of people have less than 10 years experience. We've got a lot of new people coming in and it's been expanding massively. One of the interesting things, maybe interesting is not quite the word, but one of the effects of that and effects of social media is we have shrunk software engineering down to almost web development and forgotten that there was a massive field outside that. So one of the things that shocked me, I think about 18 months ago when I responded to a comment about mainframes, is I went and looked at the market, and the mainframe market is bigger than it's ever been before, and it's still growing. And I was shocked by that because I remember, like I said, I entered the workforce in 1996, and I thought mainframes were dead then. Everybody said if COBOL's dead, mainframes are gone. And 30 years later, the mainframe market's bigger than it's ever been. There are new ones shipping. IBM is pushing the AI features of their latest mainframe, and that's a growing market. And I'm still amazed by that because I don't actually know anyone after 30 years that works on mainframes. That's not true. I interviewed somebody on my podcast a while back, does mainframe security, which is also a growing field because there's so much financial transactions going through them. So we never see it talked about on social media hardly, but that is a massive and growing field. And when I then looked at that, and like I say, shiny things, distracted, I found there are people still writing COBOL courses. There's one university still teaching a course and got high demand. There are COBOL courses, I think, on Udemy with 24,000 people that have taken it and reviewed it. So they're doing massive business. So I know lots on Amazon, and the latest books teaching COBOL were from like 2023, 2024. So we forget that there's whole big sections of the industry that you don't see talked about. And the same for a lot of people forget there's a whole massive world doing embedded devices. Again, another strange one I found, it's years since I worked on hardcore embedded software. And when I did, I was trying to get people to move to C++ because I thought it was a much better language than C. And that was 26 years ago. C is still the predominant language for embedded. And much as people are trying to push Lisp, Python is the third biggest language in the embedded world by far, and is widely used in embedded devices. And again, that kind of contrast with, if we say Python is interpreted and slow and wasteful in memory, but it's one of the most commonly used languages on small embedded devices. And that's partly because IoT, which again is a massive market, but we hardly see represented on a lot of social media and a lot of people talking about it, where most of the world seems to talk about web development and JavaScript and TypeScript. So yeah, we forget that it's a massive industry. There are people building software for all sorts of things. And some of these things that we think of niches, like mainframes, are bigger than the whole market was when I started my career. That's how fast we're growing. You also mentioned peeling back the layers and understanding how they work. I think that's so useful. And one of the things that I'm doing in a coding challenge soon, and I've had quite fun doing a few talks on, is building an AI agent. There's so many people and get carried away with, I'm going to write my Claude or Agents MD, I'm going to write the skills, I'm going to write this plugin, I'm going to write the sub-agents and so on. But at the end of the day, an LLM is just an API that you call over REST and you pass it some JSON. And all these things clap down to you passing some JSON to a REST API. So I'm looking forward to doing the agent coding challenge and taking more people through that so they see what a coding agent really is, and then have a better understanding of what's happening and how they can use that LM and what it's really doing so they can leverage it better.
I'm so excited for that. Especially working on a Copilot API is something that honestly I'd love to understand more of the agent side of things and the prompting side, but the request side is very near and dear to my heart for sure. But that's such a great perspective on the market as a whole. I think oftentimes we get so focused on what we're doing or our like the news saying that web development's dead that we do forget that there's a lot of technology and very important technology that lies on older stacks and other things that the industry kind of says, oh, we don't need to worry about that. So I really, really appreciate that nuanced take. And as we're kind of coming up to time, but I am curious before we go to our fun segment. You are doing a lot. You're running the Coding Challenges newsletter, the Coding Chats podcast, the YouTube channel, your LinkedIn, probably staying up to date with the entire industry as well and trends there. So as this is overcommitted, how do you manage all of that? And do you have any tips or takes on sustainability and doing that while this is your business and running your business and protecting that part of your...
I think the basic answer there is I'm overcommitted. Yeah. It's back to what I said earlier about trying different things and validating them. So some of the things I've done have been attempts to find out what is the right business for me, what works for me. So the validating ideas and pulling back on the things that I don't enjoy or don't work or don't provide a good ROI for the time or finances. Secondly, I get help with some of it. So the podcast, for example, is really easy. And that basically boils down to I have a 1 hour chat with some lovely people, learn something interesting. That's a lot of fun. All the hard work is done by my wife who edits the podcast. So she spends hours editing it and putting it together afterwards. So the podcast is just a lot of fun and a nice hour for me chatting to somebody interesting. The 5 or 6 hours that go into editing each episode and then all the extra work is all done by her. So I'm really grateful for that and that makes it a lot easier. The coding challenges, again, it's a lot of them are ideas I've had or they're things that I'm curious to learn. It almost feels like fun and play to go and create a lot of these things and go and figure out, oh, how does that work? How can I pick it apart? How can I turn it into a coding challenge? So it's quite easy to lose hours digging into that and have fun doing that.
That makes a lot of sense. I think fun is really the secret to all of it. That's I think a honest and refreshing take to being overcommitted. All right. So I am very excited about our fun segment today. I know we've talked a lot about language, being language agnostic and how specific languages might not work or it might not matter. You can kind of take and pick what you want. I did run into a blog post while researching where you ran a Mandelbrot set renderer that you wrote entirely in brainfuck, which is very, I read it and I was like, I have no idea what's going on here, but I love that. So I thought we'd do a quiz where we guess whether the programming language is real or made up. So basically just shout out your guess. I won't contribute because I do know the answers, but yeah. So we'll start out with LeetCode, which is a language where you write code using phrases like hi, can has, and k thanks bye for our millennial listeners.
I think this one's
I
real.
think that one is.
We're land on real? It
I
is
think so.
real. Yeah.
Nice.
Okay. Next.
I feel like it's got to be called LOLCode, though. I feel like there's probably a debate on the internet about whether it's LOLCode or LOL code.
Oh, you're so right. Yeah. It probably is LOLCode, but we should ask the creator and get that validated. Okay. Next is Wendy, a functional language designed for writing smart contracts on the Ethereum blockchain.
I don't know.
I mean, yes. I don't know.
I feel like it probably does make sense because it's the whole, like, somebody must have made this. It's like, oh, but you work at a Wendy's. Sir, this is a Wendy's. So I'm going to say yes, that it's real.
Oh, I was thinking
Really?
like Peter Pan Wendy.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
It's definitely Wendy's. Like the, yeah, the fast food chain.
So this is a Wendy's. That's amazing. Well, we should create it because it does not currently exist, but that would be a good angle to take. Okay. White space, a language where only spaces, tabs, and new lines are meaningful and all other characters are ignored.
I believe that's real.
Can't be. It's gotta be.
No, I hope not.
Yeah. Burn it down.
I'm
Yeah.
There's
so
the language
sorry,
chicken, where everything is how many times you say the word chicken.
but no,
Gosh.
that's amazing. Well, white space is real, so John's right there for John.
I can't imagine code reviewing that. That sounds miserable.
Yeah.
That's the neat part. You don't. Okay, Rockstar, a language designed so that programs read like rock ballads with variables declared like Tommy is a rock star.
I know this one.
Mm-hmm. I've heard of this one. It's real.
It is real. I remember
real.
because people were like, oh, you can say I'm a Rockstar developer on your resume, and people thought that was so fun.
Dylan Beatty, the creator, has a couple of brilliant talks about creating it. Well worth watching.
Okay, we'll have
Or
to
better
link
yet,
those.
invite him on. Yeah, he's a great speaker.
All right, Dylan.
He's a rock
Keep an eye
star.
out for that. Yeah, a Rockstar developer. Keep an eye out.
I think he has some swag. marked up so you can get a sticker that he gives away at his talks. I've only seen his
Amazing.
talks on YouTube, unfortunately. I've never managed to get to one, but they're really, really good.
I will have to track next time he
He's
talks
also a
about
good
something.
musician. He plays music at his talks as well.
It makes sense with Rockstar.
Yeah.
No wonder it's like rock ballads. Okay. Next is Frostbite, a stack-based language where every operation is named after a type of weather.
That sounds real. That sounds weird enough.
I'm going to say no, only because I'm not sure what a stack-based language is.
It is fake. Stack-based languages are real, but it is fake.
Great.
Wait, if we're doing the reveals as we go, did we ever say what the first one was? Was it real or not?
It was real. Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay. Next is Shakespeare, a language where programs look like Shakespearean plays and variables are characters like Romeo and Juliet.
I love this
I
one.
believe that's real.
Yeah, it's got to be real.
It's real. Yep. Okay, this one.
I'll go for it. I'll say real.
I'm going to say no for that one, but it does remind me there is one which is coloured squares of different sizes.
Learning more about these other programming languages and I created this.
Yeah, I can't remember what it's called, but there is one which is...
Wow. Well, while you're looking that up, but beeswax is real. I had to Google it because I'm like, what does that even mean? Hexagonal grid.
And is that like functional? Like, is that meant to like make you improve your usage of instruction pointers, or is it really only for fun?
I have no idea. I'm sure most of these are for fun. But okay, Piet is what the squares is called.
Yeah, that's the coloured one. There's a couple of pictures on that Wikipedia page.
Ooh.
So try code reviewing that.
It's like going to an art museum. Honestly, maybe my mental well-being would be better if that was what I'm reviewing. It's like, oh, art, what does this mean?
Rorschach test.
Yeah. All right, finally, Goblin, an interpreted language where all error messages are written in Tolkien's Black speech.
I think that's probably real. That sounds
Seems
typically esoteric enough.
like the Venn diagram of like people creating programming languages and people who want an error message written by a goblin is probably pretty strong overlap.
Yeah, it does
a
sound
circle.
very real. Yeah, it's a circle, but it does not exist. So I guess that's
No.
another one we got to get on.
Okay.
Missed opportunity. Yeah.
Hide
before
that
everybody else
and
does.
make it, and then revise and be like, that's real. We made it.
We made it.
All right. Well, that is all the languages I had. But John, it sounds like you have so many more. So unfortunately, though, we are at time. Thank you so much for coming on. Where can folks find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn as John Crickett, on X as well, and on Substack. And you can find Coding Chance. It's easy enough if you Google it, or you can Google my name as well. Very easy to find. It's quite unique.
And we will link all of those in our show notes. Thank you again
Thank you.
so much for joining us and for that conversation. And thank you, listener, for tuning in to Overcommitted. If you like what you hear, please do follow, subscribe, or do whatever it is you like to do on the podcast app of your choice. Check us out on Blue Sky and share with your friends. Until next week, bye.